Okay, I think we'll get started. So if you're coming from the GNL project, I encourage you to look at the introductory video for this playlist to see if this is the right course for you. Otherwise, we're going to talk about electromagnetic radiation. And as we've worked through now electricity and magnetism, it should be clear that there's an intimate connection between those two. And in fact, they are inextricably linked. And indeed, a changing magnetic field will induce a change in an electric field, and a changing electric field will induce a change in the magnetic field. And so this allows for the propagation of an electromagnetic wave, or electromagnetic radiation, or light, as we call it. And interestingly, and we talked about this earlier, electromagnetic waves do not need a medium such as a water wave or sound wave. They propagate through a vacuum. Now, we've been using our right hand a lot, and so we have another right hand rule here. If we put our thumb in the direction that the light is traveling, so let's just imagine a laser beam going in this direction, and we'll call this the X direction, and then we'll call the direction of the board Y, and then out at you Z. So a little unconventional here, but this is how we're going to orient our coordinate system. And okay, so we'll point in this direction, so that means we'll put our thumb in the direction that we're propagating. This is called the wave vector, or K vector, or propagation vector, a couple different names there. And then our pointer finger will go in the direction of the electric field, and then our middle finger will go in the direction of the magnetic field. And so as this electric field oscillates, here it's pointing upward. So in this part of the wave, I'm like this, and that means the B field is coming out of the board. And then now in this part of the wave, I'm still propagating in this same direction, but now I'm down, so I'm into the board. So as our blue wave here, our electric wave goes, our electric field oscillates up and down in the board, the magnetic field oscillates in and out of the board. It propagates at the speed of light, and you can do a quick check here. If you do the 1 over the square root of the permittivity of free space and magnetic permeability, you get the speed of light. As a mathematical equation, we've seen this before in terms of waves, but it certainly holds true with electromagnetic waves. The field in the y direction now is some total or some amplitude, E naught. So this is the strength of the electric field times sinusoidal type wave. And we have the two characteristic components, the distance, right? How far does it travel in a wavelength, right? So this is a ratio of the distance to the wavelength, and here we have a time to a period. And the minus, we really have plus or minus here, depending on if our wave is traveling in this direction or this direction. Okay. So that connects back to some of the stuff we talked about right at the beginning of the course. We were talking about waves, and now with this last part of the course, talking about electricity and magnetism. The rest of this is going to be a little bit of a hodgepodge of characteristics of light. So the first thing we'll talk about here is polarization. So we've seen here, we've cast this field as up and down in the y direction. Well, that's a very special state of this light. It's called the linearly polarized state of this light. And this means that our electric field stays in one plane the whole time, and our magnetic field then stays in an orthogonal plane. So in this case, we can talk about that relative to the laboratory axis. So if we're up and down on an axis we are standing in, our axes, then we would call that vertical. And if we're side to side, if we were to rotate this over so that the B field was going up and down and the electric field was going in and out, then we would say that's horizontally polarized. So These two serve as a lot like a two-dimensional vector with an x component and a y component. You could treat your light as how much of the vertical and how much of the horizontal component you have, and that could capture just the arbitrary behavior of light. So that means these fields do not have to stay in the same plane, and they can, in fact, move out of plane. And another special state of that is when they're moving at a constant rate, spinning kind of like this or twisting like this, then we would say they're circularly polarized. And this means that in our laboratory axes, the electric field and the magnetic field are rotating out of plane. Okay, so let's imagine we've got just an unpolarized light source. So this would be like just a regular light bulb or an LED. Light comes out in all polarizations. But we can go ahead and create polarized light by using a polarizer. And you probably have experience with this, whether you know it or not, with sunglasses. So most sunglasses, or many sunglasses, are polarized. And so they block a lot of the light that is not polarized in the direction of the orientation of the polarizer. So here we are orienting the polarizer such that only light polarized vertically can get through the polarizer. So this is a way to very quickly and inexpensively, at least in terms of how much optics normally cost, to create polarized light. Now, we could then take and cross-polarize, put another polarizer in the other orientation. So this would be looking to pass only horizontally polarized light, but there isn't any because that was blocked by the first polarizer. So we actually would get no light coming out here. So we'd have some polarized light coming in and no light coming out. Now, you might imagine, what about if we twist these a little bit? Then a little bit of this, it's a little counterintuitive because you'd think you'd have to be completely oriented to get the light through, but that's not the case. If this is coming in vertically and we have, let's say, an angle that isn't completely horizontal, say it's halfway or so, then some light will get through, but it'll be attenuated, and it'll be attenuated according to Malus's law. So the output light, the light that's coming out here, will be the input light times the cosine of the angle squared. And so here we have the angle at 90 degrees. So this is the angle of the polarizers relative to each other. Here it's 90 degrees, so cosine of 90 would be 0 squared. If we pulled it all the way up, then cosine of 1 is 1, 1 squared would be, or cosine of 0 is 1, so 1 squared would be 1, and output would equal input. Okay, so that's polarization. Now, let's look at intensity of light. So you're very familiar. Some lights are bright, some are less bright. So let's look at the behavior of intensity here. So the intensity of light is the power output of that light per area. And we can get that from the strength of the field. So it's related to the strength of the field. Just some constants here: speed of light, permittivity of free space, and the electric field strength. Or you can get it from the magnetic field if you know the magnetic field: speed of light, permittivity of free space, or magnetic permittivity, and the magnitude of the magnetic field. Now, a very important case is the point source case, where you have a point source of light. How does that intensity drop off? Well, it drops off as a 1 over r squared law. So inverse square law is how the intensity drops off with distance away from the light. So if you're really close to the light, it's highly intense. You get further away, it's dropping off as the square of that distance. Okay, a little piece that's quite an abrupt jump here for us, and it really lies in while it's used a lot in classical theory, it's really lies in the area of quantum mechanics, and we'll talk very briefly about that at the end of the course when we're talking about the photoelectric effect. But we can think of light as being carried in little packets of energy h times the frequency, h being Planck's constant. So Planck's constant is a constant of nature, and it is it relates the frequency to the energy. In terms of wavelength, it's hc over lambda, and so these little, you can think of light as delivering energy packets. So it's a very different way of thinking about light as a wave. And as physicists, as chemists, when light interacts with matter, sometimes it's better to think about it in terms of waves. We saw sometimes it's better to think about it in terms of rays. So we have a wave picture, a ray picture, and now we have this photon picture. And one good example of where this is really helpful is in photochemistry. So let's imagine a reaction, and I guess I'll put a arrow here. So we'll imagine a radical reaction where light breaks up chlorine into two chlorine radicals. And it does so in a way that we can, if we think about light as these packets of photons, we can have a stoichiometry associated with that reaction. So one photon of a particular energy, of the right energy, will cause this to happen. And so we can, in a sense, use it almost as a reactant in the, or a product in a reaction. It's a little different because we don't need to conserve, we don't need to balance the photons, but it still behaves like an individual entity. And the last thing I want to talk about is the idea of blackbody radiation. So anything that is at a temperature above absolute zero will give off electromagnetic radiation. And so colder things have a less, give off less electromagnetic radiation and less at high frequency light. And then as the object warms up, it gives off more and more light. So the prime example of that is a star. Star is very hot, giving off a lot of light at really all, or a wide range of frequencies across the electromagnetic spectrum. We see it on a stove, for example. When the stove is off, the burner looks just black. When we turn the stove on, it can get hot enough so that it glows. We can see a little bit of a glowing red to it. And so we're picking up light given off via the temperature of the object. Now, in physics, we use this concept of a black body, and that's an idealized case where an object is a perfect absorber and then a perfect emitter. And so, of course, different objects are not perfectly absorbing light or giving off light perfectly in all directions. But for many cases, this works very, very well. And it serves as a good model because we can write some equations for it. We won't get into that, but we will talk about just the distribution here now. So this is intensity versus wavelength. Remember, wavelength is inversely proportional to energy. We can see that here from the photon picture. So high energy is down here, low energy is down here. If we have a high temperature, we start to get light at very low frequencies, or low wavelengths, which can push into the visible region, like with that burner on the stove, or even past into the ultraviolet, like with the sun. Then, for colder temperatures, we do not get much light up at the high temperatures, and so we get this distribution of wavelengths coming off these black bodies. We will just work with one formula. I think there's a homework question on that, and it's described by Wien's law, or it is Wien's law, and so the maximum position. So, of course, it's spread, but this is the lambda max, is given by 2.9 times 10 to the 8th nanometers per Kelvin. So here we're in Kelvin, temperature in Kelvin, and wavelength in nanometers divided by the temperature that we're at. So you can get a ballpark estimate of the color of the light that you're getting with temperature. All right, so kind of a hodgepodge of stuff here for light, but important stuff, and it comes out of what we've been talking about in a very systematic, coherent way, but then has a lot of other features as well. And light is one of the most important things used in physics and chemistry to interrogate matter and to understand our universe better.